We have our last session on community, and I'm very happy to present the next team of presenters. They're actually two-thirds of a team from Lebanon, from Febrik. Please welcome Jamin Al-Jabri and Reem Sharif.
Hi. 11 million people. That's the population of neighboring country Belgium. Now imagine 70% of that population in refuge. You have the Palestinian scenario. 70% of the Palestinian population is in refuge and displaced. Out of the 70, actually, 1 of 3 refugees around the world is Palestinian. And this is sort of a selection of the types of spaces that they live in various countries. The countries that today hold most of the Palestinian refugees are Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and Palestine. Within Palestine, we mean the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Children are a major factor, obviously, of the refugee equation. And although very similar to children around the world, the conditions that they undergo and live under are quite different. At the time we started working in Lebanon, in one of the refugee camps, Burj al-Barajne, there were about over 70 professions that Palestinians could not practice under the Lebanese law within Lebanon. And some of the conditions they undergo are similar to this. This is one of the refugee camps, again in Lebanon, north of Lebanon, in 2007, where 20,000 people were forced to move out of the camp due to military action. And so what happens in situations like that is that the refugees actually go to another refugee camp and utilize schools as housing, temporary housing. And so schools become a place that is less used by children at these times. This is another situation that Palestinian children undergo, which is the no-go zones that's specific to Palestine, the West Bank and Gaza. The danger zones and some of the dangers of actually simply walking around or playing in certain areas. Also, one of the major factors of living in refuge is physical space. And these are a selection of images from, again, different refugee camps that show social practices within some of the urban spaces, and mostly public spaces in these camps. And this is really the area that we're mostly concerned with in Febrik. So I'll leave it now to Reem to introduce some of the work of Febrik.
Thank you. I'm going to start by reading, but I promise I will freestyle at some point. I'm just getting my groove back. So we have worked in these 3 camps during the past 10 years. 2 are in Lebanon and 1 is in Jordan, but I will today very briefly mention a project in the UK as well, in social housing estate in Peckham. This is our new idea, which I think applies to a lot of organizations or designers working in the public field, or public space, let's say. We call it a propositionometer. This is because we believe that design plays an integral role in positively contributing to changing the politics and dynamics of public spaces and negotiating the right of space of unrepresented groups, and in our case, especially in the Middle East and in relation to spaces of refuge. So design itself, whether it be research, education, or spatial interventions, printed matter, physical structures, so you go all the way from research all the way up to intervention. All these different types of propositions for us are about propositional thinking. And this is what we believe makes design different, is that designers Design is a tool for proposing and imagining possibilities of new things. It goes beyond recognizing the problem and into offering multiple solutions. We're particularly interested in children and in their forgotten role as catalysts and leaders of change and creative thinking. They're natural and inventive designers, and a lot of what I'm going to show next will show you that they're very, very good designers. And we hope, through our workshops with them, and through different projects through these years, to pass on some design skills from drawing, collaging, writing, but ways of communicating and proposing. Because design is a communication and a negotiation tool, and its physicality, once it's out there as a physical being, it forces conversations that generate, that go further than table talk and into everyday situations and habits. So this is a diagram about the negotiation between our work, children and their families in different contexts. I'm going to start with the first project, What's Your Dream? We asked some children what's their dream. And this is talking about designers' research. Before a designer can do anything, really, you've got to find out to understand your context and to understand the practices and values of this community. So we asked them what they wanted to be. And a lot of them came back saying that we want to be teachers. And we thought, that's very interesting. Why is that? So we went through a process and we realized that there were two reasons for that. One is that there are more than 70 professions that Palestinian refugees are not allowed to practice in Lebanon, and therefore this is one of the ones they can practice because the UNRWA offers education for free to Palestinian refugees. So they could see it as a real, that something would happen in the future. But the other reason is they were very critical of these classrooms. So the lady on the right suggests that classrooms should be more spaces for whispering or for talking quietly because their teachers talk too loud. And the boy in the middle, they all had to design a costume about their dream that tells the story of how they would do it better. And the middle one, Jamal, is proposing a theatrical education because he thinks education that is about repeating is very boring. Anyway, there are many different types of dreams, and this is, I'm going to talk about, we've talked a lot about water actually today, so this is quite interesting. In this project, the boy was interested again to be a teacher, but this time it's because he was fascinated by the teacher's bag. He thought that the teacher every time comes and there are lots of things in the bag and he really wants to know what's inside the bag. So we designed with him. So we went through a process and we talked about transparency, and he started playing with the idea of transparency, and then he designed a bag that kind of looks like it's wet, and it is a bag, but then his dream costume is to reveal it and to reveal the contents to everybody. And that's what he would practice on stage, the revealing and the coming out of the bag. So in the second project that we did 2 years later, we asked them, so how do you play? And the same boy, again, decided that he wants to continue his research into water. And we've edited out a little bit of the images. So what you can see on the right-hand side, actually, there were about, I don't know, almost 50 photographs that he took looking at the fact that water was very scarce, and yet it was leaking everywhere. So he thought, well, because obviously there's a lack of playgrounds, there's no official spaces for children, so he devised a design tool which is about collecting different types of water and using them for play, for drawing, for many other propositions. But he designed this intervention. And in this case, the research showed, again, by working with this young lady who, only when the tank on the roof overflows, she plays upstairs on the roof, but what she tries to do is to spray her friends at the windows that are so close by. You know, it's less than a meter between the two buildings. And she can play this game only for about half an hour because the water tanks, which are at the bottom, are switched on by a water guard that goes around the camp and switches, he switches the first one and the second one, goes all the way around. By the time he comes back to switch them off again, the water is overflown. So she's got half an hour to play her game. So, I mean, these kind of very intuitive playgrounds. And again, here you've got, I'll try to tell again a very quick story. This playground is about the visit of his grandmother, who visits only once a week because there isn't enough water to wash all the time. So she collects all her clothes, comes to visit them, and the mum and the grandmother spend the whole morning washing. And then the roof becomes a landscape of play. So he plays, and they start to designate different countries between all these different borders created by the washing. I think it's compared. So this is, again, I'm sorry, so many water examples, but I thought it was really interesting, this session with water. And here, this is a different camp in Jordan, but his game is about listening to the water and making sure that it comes. When the water comes, so he goes out to the pipe, puts his ear against it, and when it comes, he climbs up, tells his mother that it's here so she can do washing. But he became an expert. He invented, like all of them, he invented a playground based on these scarcities. And while trying to climb up to all these high spaces, also to search for a quiet space, because there's no quiet space, he also discovered a playground of pipes in the camp, and that's what they began to play. So something that was very kind of about helping his mother tell her that the waters arrived became their playground. And this is a very, very quick example about helping her mother with tailoring. So although children don't have space, women also don't have space. Her mother is a tailor, her game is kind of the offcuts that she gives her. There are almost 10 male commercial tailoring spaces in the camp, but all the women work from home in their own private social domain. There's no space for women in the public space. In this case, we go and we make something called play manuals, which we call research towards proposition, and we work with the children to use photography, drawing, sequential photography to tell a story, narrative photography, mapping and identifying spaces. Again, that's the mapping of all the children together about their play spaces, how the body moves, collages. So they've become excellent little architects. They can draw plans of their games and how much space they need and who are the different people negotiating that space and so on. And through these drawings, we create, and also we do collages that, again, as any designer is, they speculate on the possibility of these scarce resources. How can I reuse a chair? How can I reuse a pipe? How can I invent a new space or a new public space where there is space for me, or for them in that case, through these propositions. And so we make something called a play manual, which we think not only records their hidden topography of play, which is something we've discovered and learned from them, but also teaches us that children are natural designers and that we really need to learn from how they appropriate these architectural elements and objects. And these are the manuals, which they can give to anybody else. They're a product, and they can give to someone and say, that's how you can play without a playground. And in them, I think they become incredibly competent at talking about their context and understanding their space and their public space. See, there are different types of manuals. This is in the Soul Garden estate in London, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And we decided to make our own manuals, which is learning from them and making analysis of how these different architectural elements have been used and misused, and analyzing those play pockets and the dynamics between different groups. And a lot of the discoveries are very much about male dominance of the public space, then the elderly, then women, then families, then women, then children. But children are very clever. They wait to see when spaces are empty and when things are left behind, and they kind of overtake them. Then we decide, well, part of Febrik's work, because we often come from an architectural background, we work with a large variety of friends, institutions, volunteers, individuals, but a lot of us are designers or architects, definitely, sometimes artists as well, which I think is all the same field, to be honest. And we decide to do site-specific interventions where we take these hidden topographies and we reveal them, and we started to propose this idea of a fragmented playground. This is one intervention where the children decided this time it was the right of space of workers, and they saw these very poor, not poor, but very kind of uncomfortable beds that are there for the workers to sleep when they're tired. So they decided to intervene by creating a garden and a bed, which you can see on the floor, which moves with the body to make comfort. This is a traveling exhibition where they want to collect objects and then go to different places and show them. Again, there's no museum in the camp. I think they're suggesting a museum. I think they're very good urban designers. This is a theater of the everyday, that's what he called it. And again, there's no theater in the camp, but he's proposing a theater. Which is quite wonderful. And in this case, this is a moment where the penny dropped, and you can see that these chairs that have been appropriated, each one has a story, and I'll just tell you one, which is the one on the left, for example. That is rebelling against their mothers, not letting them bounce on the bed. So it's a chair that you can bounce on. And all these different elements have become a kind of something that maybe we recognize a little bit more as a playground furniture, but put against their parents in the background, you start to understand that perhaps there is a space for coexistence or for negotiation through creating public spaces that are intergenerational. Just very quickly, this is the project in London, and this is called the Shop of Possibilities, where we decided to take that and to test the idea of appropriating objects. So we asked people from the estate to donate furniture that we cut apart, and the idea is that children can come and borrow whatever they want and make a new game. So the wall is continuously changing as people donate things and they're cut up and taken apart. And this is one game, Ellie's Wishing Tree. So she began by just borrowing some buckets, some spoons and so on, and then she formalized it into this play kit. playground, or compressed playground as we call it, and then she marked her space. That's her tree, and it's called the wish-in tree, which is very interesting in the public realm of the housing state. So going back to this, then I think one of the things about this idea of public space and design as a negotiator, I think that the idea of social playground, the idea that you're forcing different generations to coexist, is that really what democracy is? And I think that's one of the questions that's set up in our group about connecting communities. And there is an interesting thought, philosophical thought, I think, but I'm sorry, I've lost my notes, so I can't remember. I'm very bad with names, but I read something quite interesting where she was talking about radical democracy, and that democracy has to be about difference. And if we say that public space is about good things and is about everybody coexisting, we are denying difference. So real democracy, or public space that is good, let's say, has to be a space where there is passion and there is discussion and there is disagreement, and there has to be a space for that. It is not an ideal kind of space. So this is the project that Jumana talked about, and I'll just show our first proposal. They asked us to design, they liked this idea of fragmented playground, and they asked us to design a fragmented intergenerational playground. These are some of we made something called Prototype Dictionary, which is interventions into everyday objects like the children, handrails, staircases, whatever it is. So this is a proposal for the benches, so very simple benches that during the day can be used as benches, but at night become a theater as you turn yourself and face the staircase and put a little bit of a red rug, you have a theater. Again, it's always limited resources. This is the idea of intervening in a window. The mothers don't like the children to go far away. They want to always watch them. So while she's washing, she can see her child play. This is actually a theater where from above you can control the puppets and from below you can watch it. And again, different examples for interventions for windows. And then the handrail, my personal favorite, where you can see so many children playing on handrails. And this one, if you can see from the sketch there, is the ramp is for the disabled, and they've got the right handrail, but the other side of the handrail is distorted, and it's a playground, and then the adults cross on the other side. So again, it's a playground hidden within the urban topography. And the last one is the tree house, which is probably quite common, but it's very nice because the adults are at ground level, shaded by the tree and the playground, but the children play above and below. So we are waiting for them to build it. I'm still waiting. But they might, so we'll see. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is our project in Talbiye, which is in Amman, Jordan. And this time it was a slightly bigger project, and they asked us to design a public space in a pocket, so not fragmented, but actually slightly not quite a playground, but a medium-sized, say, public pocket. And it was, we worked with the families this time and with different organization adults, where we trained them also how to use design tools of analysis. And they worked with the children, we worked with the children, and this time we made models, so they really became little architects, proposing different types of propositions for how this public space might be and what it needs. This is some of the analysis of the models that they've made and how we took their models, analyzed them, and these are their collages and their models, and we tried to analyze them into different type of spatial types that then proposed our first prototype, which is called Edge of Play, where one side is for the children, and it is about the private moment for the children, really claiming their space. It's always there. They finally need to have a space for themselves. It's slightly different in that it is a little bit more of a playground. On the left is a space for women, again, for the first, just to gently start to negotiate their right of space. This space is always there, obviously, but the women actually have a reason to be there, which is that they wait for the UN rations, which are collected nearby. Now, when we proposed this to the community, they said, oh, wait, we have another idea, fantastic idea, actually, which is that they wanted to, this is how weddings are held. So the weddings are just held as they're for women only, but you get this frame that is just then covered with an awning, and that becomes a wedding space. And you can see this wonderful bride suite thing that she sits on in the background. So that made us very excited. So we amended our design, and sorry, the yellow before was not on purpose. The back space, as you can see, is a space which is continuously a play space, and this front space is a space where if children sit at the front here, it becomes a theater. It's also for the women to wait, but also When the wedding is on, sorry, this is inside the children's space. And when the wedding is on, you can build the same frame, the same proportions that exist. It doesn't cost them anything new. And you cover it, it becomes a wedding space. So that concrete landscape actually becomes part of the wedding space and facilitates the wedding space. So some of it was built, which was lovely. And this is some of there were many changes, including this questionable concrete, to be diplomatic, this questionable concrete walls. And then they stopped. And we don't understand why they stopped. So there is a bit of a question, and then we found out that this is because as it was being built, the men realized, what? There is a women's space? No, 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 no. You're not going to build that. So it stopped, and it stopped, and it stopped. And after a while, I mean, this is a project with the UN, part of a much bigger project. So we're quite a small fish, in a sense, in that arena. And after a lot of negotiation, the space was blocked. So again, this is really interesting. I think this is genuine. And I think when we went back again recently, which was only a month ago or something, there was a huge negotiation that this is the first time in the camp there has been a children's space, which they themselves had suggested for it to be where it is. But now they're saying partly it's too loud, partly they're trying to avoid the idea of women's space being attached to it, but also because apparently during the process of kind of consultation, the UN had not talked to every single household that's living around. So some neighbors were quite upset that they were not included. So the negotiations are on many levels. So at the moment, the big question is it going to go somewhere else and become a proper playground, or is it going to continue and become a social playground that will start to negotiate the right of women? And we'll keep you posted. Jumana's going to wrap up. Thank you from me. But, oh, no, wait. She's going to say.
So one of the most marking comments that one of the children gave us the first time we worked in Burj Al Barajni in Lebanon in 2003 was, we asked the children what they thought of the workshop we had just held, and they said it was fun, but it's like every other workshop we get from Japanese, Italians, Egyptians coming and doing these 2-week workshops and then leaving. So the idea of continuity was very important for us, and to allow them to feel like this is part of a partnership and the continuous communication about their work and progressing. So one of the things we have been working on very extensively in the past more than a year is a documentation of specifically the work we have done in Burj Al Barajni, the camp next to Beirut. And it's a documentation in both English and Arabic, obviously to reach to the children, but also communities and other contexts. And what it does, it actually takes every single day of the workshop. It's almost 300 pages. So it takes every day of the workshops. It's an education and manual. It documents the children's stories. And it also documents the spaces within the camps. Oops, sorry, going back. These are a few pages of the book. And one of the things that during our process was very important was also the transfer of knowledge, not only through such a documentation, but also from taking something from within the context of the refugee camps into the neighboring context, so the cities around them. In this case, it was Beirut specifically and Jordan and Amman. In this image, it was we had taken a theater in Beirut, and it was one of the rare occasions where the public was actually seeing something produced from within the camps. And also, there's a transfer of knowledge in our work from one camp to the other. So we have actually worked in 2 camps in Lebanon, and then the one that Reem showed in Jordan. That was a direct and a build-up of the process that we had been developing for years now. And this is the last slide, actually. Reem briefly spoke about work we've been doing also in the UK, and that's also another type of transfer of knowledge. So it's not really just within the refugee camps that we work. It's a creative process that applies in many different contexts, and we hope now through our work, but also through the book, to be able to continue that conversation and build on our findings, and maybe for other people to apply a similar process and come back with different findings in different contexts. So thank you.
So, Reem, if you can join me just quickly. So, your work brings up many, many questions, of course. You are working within the dimensions of conflict, and initially at the beginning there is really a sense of a conflict that comes from outside, but at the end of the presentation, conflict seemed to be from the inside. Can you just tell us a little bit about that, and what kind of discovery was that for you?
I don't know if I would use the term conflict inside. Maybe you're referring to the fact that women were not allowed spaces
the
and
space,
the children.
You talked about space being something where conflict is being made real, places destroyed, people moved, and in this case, you're trying to create a space to generate a different kind of relationship, and it's being stopped or destroyed.
I think to answer that, one has to really go back to the expectations of what the space was about. The space when we first were just, I'm taking one example, which was the Jordan one. The space was initially a parking space and a wedding space, and a space for possibly an extension of the houses that were around it. So there were many expectations. So I think in the process, what we learned and what the UN actually learned was that maybe the way we involved the communities was actually not extensive enough, that it's not about them refusing the proposal, but it's just that how do you build, and maybe unfortunately it came too quickly, the insertion in that space. So it's not that the final proposal is refused, and it's not yet, although it's caged, but it's paused. And one way to have solved that is to actually have inserted maybe the architectural elements very slowly, so that people actually start living with them, and that would have maybe avoided some of that tension.
I mean, I would say that for us, when there are two things. One is that they've been waiting for 50 years. So when you are in refuge for 50 years, there are times when you just have to stop thinking about being in refuge, and I think this is a real environment. So the conflict inside is about a normal community, right? A community that is trying to sort itself out. And for me, the yellow cage is the jewel. This is the moment of negotiation. It's happening. They're talking, and that's very important, and that's what design can do. So that's quite lovely. And the external conversation, which you can see, we've avoided talking about the bigger issue, the issues of Israel or the issues of occupation or whatever, because I think at this moment, design is not negotiating that, and therefore it is a slightly separate issue. So we can only talk about the results of that and how that is affecting the daily life. I think we are talking about design in every day, not on a political level, I would say.
But also coming in from within. I think that was the lesson.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.